We've all done it. Giggled at the lonely stranger talking to themselves in the aisles of the grocery store. Grinned at the elderly tourists staring aimlessly at nothing amidst the busyness of a bustling city street. We give them a passing glance, have our brief smile, or perhaps our moment of feeling sorry for these folks, and then we move on. We head back to our day-to-day lives. That's just what I was doing, going about my day-to-day life, when I started to question just how out of touch the folks I just referred to really are. Perhaps they're in touch with a world that's just beyond our own, just beyond the grasp of everyday society. A darker world. It was Wednesday night, late in September, and I'd just gotten in from a lengthy business trip. I arrived home to find my wife laid up in bed with a terrible migraine headache, and my children sitting on the couch, wrapped up in a heated game of trivia on the PlayStation. There really isn't any way for me to not sound like a jerk here, but I was road weary, beaten down from 8 hours of staring at asphalt, and just wanted to flop down onto the couch and put the time on the road behind me. But, with the kids on the couch and the wife laying in bed surrounded by darkness, I was officially out of places to sit my tired old butt. So after long overdue embraces to my son and daughter, and a kiss on my ailing wife's forehead, I found myself leaning back against the kitchen counter. I stood there in silence, staring at the stove and listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, trying to decide what to make for dinner. Cooking was the last thing I felt like doing. Yet, there I stood, perhaps waiting for supper to prepare itself. I opened the fridge about 6 times, each time looking into the illuminated box, only to close the door while shaking my head when I found nothing to my liking. That sealed it. I wasn't in the mood to cook, but I damn sure was in the mood to eat. With my wife sick in bed and the kids actually getting along, I decided my best bet was to just run out and grab food for the family. I really didn't feel like getting back in the car, but after a full day of driving, what was 20 more minutes? So I pulled the rest of the house on what to grab for everyone. I live in a little community just off the interstate, but with a population of just over 3,000, our options are limited to the standard small town fare. Pizza, Chinese, Mexican, and a tiny diner that offered home cooking style meals were about our only choices, not counting the handful of fast food joints just off the interstate exit. My wife didn't care, as long as she didn't have to deal with it. My daughter wanted chicken wings, and my son wanted seafood. I was up for anything as long as I could get everyone's food at the same place. Getting back behind the wheel was fine. Running all over town was a different story entirely. However, with the choices my kids came back with, my options were limited. Fast food was out, and so was the little Mexican place on the far side of town. I could get shrimp there, but they didn't have chicken wings. The pizza place in the strip mall had wings, but no seafood on the menu. That left the Chinese place. They made both of the items my kids were looking for, fried shrimps and wings. My wife always got the same thing, so I wouldn't have to pester her about the menu, and I'd never been known to turn down an order of General Tso's chicken. I went to the living room and got everyone's okay with my choice before calling the order in. An order of fried shrimp, an order of 8 wings, an order of chicken and broccoli, and finally, my order of General Tso with a side of sweet and sour soup. I was informed that it would be about 15 minutes. That's just about how long it took to get from my house on the outskirts of town to the little Chinese takeout. I asked my kids to set the table once their current game of trivia ended before making my way out the door. Even though I spend a third of my working life behind the wheel, I don't mind driving around if I'm close to home. My little piece of America is what I think a small town should be. Friendly faces, people waving as you pass by, and a real sense of community. People at the grocery store know your name. Police officers ask about your kids, and the checkout girl at the gas station knows how you like your coffee. That's probably why I'd be so shocked by the time sun rose the next morning. Since I'm so fond of the place I call home, I'm always happy to drive through the place. Being such a nice day, I put the windows down in my Chevy, turned up the Hank Jr., and made my way across town to the Takeout place. Being on the south side of town, it took a while to get to Ming's number 1 on the far north side of town. It was only about 4 miles, but when you factor in neighborhood streets and winding roads, the minutes add up. The carryout shared a parking lot with a small laundromat. The proprietor of the restaurant also owned the laundromat, though I'd never formally met the man. I knew his face from school functions I'd attended over the years, as one of his sons was in the same grade as my daughter. I pulled into the parking lot, slipping my truck into one of the 3 remaining open parking slots. There were 12 spots in the little shared parking lot. It seemed pretty busy for a Wednesday night. I got out from behind the wheel and walked into the restaurant, holding the door for a younger guy that had his hands full with multiple bags of his own. When I stepped to the counter, the familiar face of a pretty young Asian woman smiled at me and said, "You're General So in sweet sour soup, right?" I nodded. Like I said, small town. "Okay, just 1 minute. I get whole order," she stated, slipping out of view into the kitchen behind me. As I stood waiting at the counter, I heard the front door open behind me. An old woman, hunched at the shoulders, with stringy white hair that hung loosely around her face, walked through the door. She wore a white blouse and dark slacks, pulled high on her waist and clinched tight over her belly button. Her face was pale, the skin wrinkled, and matching the veiny flesh that pulled against long, bony fingers on her hands. Her eyes were sunken and dark. Hers was a face I did not recall seeing before. But it wasn't her face that caught my attention. It was the baby doll she was cradling in her left arm. Nothing really out of the ordinary about it, just a regular run-of-the-mill doll with plastic limbs and an all-plastic head sewn on to a stuffed torso. Absent of any clothing, the torso was just a stained, rather dingy white color. It wasn't the talking type or the kind of toy that pees and poops, but just a standard old, boring baby doll. And she was talking to it. I cannot tell just what the old woman was saying to the doll, as she stroked the plastic hair on its head with her long, pale finger. Her voice was lower than a whisper, very raspy, and completely inaudible. Her lips moved slowly, as did the hand that rubbed the toy's forehead. She seemed to be trying to soothe it. The whole thing was a little off-putting, but I've seen the horrible effects of dementia on the elderly, so I passed it off and turned my attention back to the counter. I was just in time to see the young woman come out from the kitchen with 2 bags of food. I quickly paid for my carryout, exchanged parting pleasantries with the checkout girl, and turned to leave the restaurant. As I began to pass the elderly woman, who still appeared to be comforting the doll, I stepped out toward my left to give her a little extra room. Grabbing the handle to the exit, I lurched backward as the old woman's hand shot from the plastic toy's forehead and wrapped tightly around my exposed forearm. With surprising strength, her cold fingers pressed into my skin. I'd like to think I could have pulled away with ease, but I can't swear that to be true. Besides, Even though the shock hadn't yet worn off, I had no desire to hurt the old woman. I turned to face her, to see if she needed help. I looked into those sunken eyes and asked if she was okay. She returned my gaze, and amazingly, her grip tightened. It actually began to hurt. She looked frightened. "You have to help us," she said, her voice shaky and weak. "I've never seen so many." "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't know what you mean," I replied. She pulled her gaze from mine and looked through the glass door and into the parking lot. I followed her gaze and looked toward the cars outside. Everything looked as it did when I arrived. "The black souls outside." She began to tremble. "The demon men. They are everywhere." Tears began to well up in the old woman's eyes. She released her grip on my forearm and raised a frail finger toward the window. She pointed toward the vehicles in the lot and began to sob loudly. Through the tears, she forced herself to speak again. "They bring death. They're crawling all over everything." At that moment, the door beside us opened, and an elderly man, sporting a neatly trimmed beard and leaning on a cane, stepped into the carryout. He moved forward slowly, taking the trembling woman's hand in his own before pulling it to his chest. "It's okay, Ingrid. Stay calm. Everything is okay," he whispered to her. The gentleman then turned to me, and then smiled warmly. "I'm sorry, young man. She becomes confused on occasion these days." "It's no trouble, sir," I replied, holding the door for the couple as he led her back into the parking lot. I assumed they'd been in the laundromat, and she wandered away. Heading out of the carryout myself, I kept one eye on the elderly pair's direction as I climbed into my pickup, setting the 2 bags of dinner in the passenger seat of the truck. I watched as he rubbed her shoulders gently, trying to soothe the frazzled woman, very much like she'd been doing with the baby doll. He spoke to her softly, but the old woman's head kept moving from side to side. She seemed to be searching the parking lot for something. A little unnerved and ready for a belly full of General Tso's chicken, I began to back up, staring into the rearview mirror and finally taking my eyes off the couple. That's when the screaming started. "Don't make me go back in there," the woman screamed, fighting back tears. "The evil is everywhere in there." That was enough for me. I began to put up the windows while simultaneously pulling toward the exit of the parking lot. Still, I couldn't help one last glance towards the front of the laundromat. Morbid curiosity, I guess. To this day, I wish I'd have just kept driving. Standing there, with her slender, jagged figure pointing in my direction, the old woman screamed out to me. This time, a warning. "The black souls bring death, and next, they come for you." The words were garbled and strained, but they were clear. A cold chill ran down my spine as I turned the truck away and pulled on the street, nearly clipping a beat-up old Ford as it sped recklessly into the carryout parking lot. In the 15 minutes it took to get home, I lost myself in the warm autumn air and the music blasting out of my speakers. With the exception of the local cop flying past me, and his lights flashing and siren blaring, the ride had been peaceful, allowing me to shake off the incident at the Chinese place. Once through my front door, I dished out the kids' meals and carried my wife's dinner, as well as my own, upstairs to where she was resting off the migraine. I didn't want her to eat alone. I opened her chicken and broccoli and proceeded to set up a folding tray for her to rest the food on. Only it wasn't chicken and broccoli. The restaurant had screwed up and sent her beef instead. Always something, isn't it? Had it been my food that was screwed up, I'd just grin and bear it. However, my wife doesn't eat red meat. I offered her the General So, but she wasn't feeling well and didn't want anything spicy. I got that and wrapped the beef and broccoli back up to take back so the takeout place could get it right. Ignoring her objection, I closed the lid on my dinner and called Ming's number 1 to inform them of the error and hopefully expedite my trip a bit. Strangely, they did not answer. In 7 years of calling in for takeout there, I can't recall a single time they'd failed to pick up the phone. Annoyed but undeterred, I took the incorrect dish out to the truck and headed back to the restaurant. The sun had dipped below the trees for most of the ride, and the air wasn't quite as warm as it had been just 20 minutes before. I noticed, as I pulled onto the main road through our little town, that there were no cars coming toward me. In fact, the only vehicles I saw at all were 2 state police cars that tore past me in the same direction I was going. I recall thinking that it must have been a nasty wreck on the interstate. Big rigs seemed to turn over once every couple of months. That was about the most excitement our police department ever saw. At least until that afternoon. As I neared the carryout place, I noticed that traffic ahead of me had stopped. 2 state police cars had pulled across the 2-lane road that ran through the heart of town, facing one another, headlights to headlights. They were detouring traffic to a side road on the left. I muttered under my breath and tried to call the Chinese place once again. Finally, someone answered. "Sorry, we're closed." The words came quick and sharply, and then the woman on the far end of the line ended the call. Irritated, but ready to accept defeat, I turned the car around right there in the middle of the street and proceeded to the only pizza place in town. I placed my order for a personal-sized cheese and sat down in a booth while I waited. While ordering, the teen behind the counter asked me if I had any idea what all the sirens had been about. Of course, I didn't have a clue. But as we discussed the topic, another siren squealed in the distance. My curiosity was up. One of my fishing buddies was a volunteer firefighter in town, whom I figured might know what was going down. I shot him a quick text. "What's up with all the cops?" His reply came almost immediately, and it left me a little queasy. "Can't talk about it. Just know it's bad. Stay home and hug your kids." The response was chilling. Not one to gossip, I kept what little I now knew to myself and sat in silence. Once the pizza was ready, I took it home and handed the box to my wife. I told her something was going on in town, but we didn't really discuss it any farther. We ate quickly, sitting up on the bed and watching television. With her head still hurting, she went to bed early. After cleaning up dinner, I played a handful of trivia games with the kids before ushering them off to showers and bed. Once they'd headed off to sleep, I popped open the internet and checked to see if anyone on social media had commented on all of the police presence in town. All I found was a single post from one of my wife's coworkers that read simply, "Prayers for our community." That was it. No comments, nothing more. It all seemed strange. Shortly, I succumbed to the rigors of the road and nodded off on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, all of my questions from the previous day were answered as soon as I turned on the television. One of the local reporters for a station out of nearby Knoxville was standing in front of Ming's number 1 in the adjoining laundromat. Behind her, police officers milled about the parking lot behind multiple runs of yellow police tape, coming in and out of the laundry door. Other news crews could be seen in the frame as well, as some men in suits and others in what looked like hazmat suits. I noticed the beat-up Ford that had almost hit my truck the day before, still sitting in the parking lot. I listened as the reporter detailed the event. A man, in his early 30s, had walked into the laundromat looking for his ex-wife. He'd found her doing laundry with her new boyfriend. According to a witness that preferred to remain anonymous, the man then opened fire on everyone inside. He'd killed 7 people before turning the gun on himself. The news report showed photos of the victims, one by one across the screen. I recognized 3 of them. One of those lost was the teller at my bank. I saw her through the driveway every other week when I'd cash my expense checks. Her name was Lisa, and she was 6 months pregnant. Another worked behind the counter of the gas station where I'd buy my bait during walleye season. The last victim the news mentioned was a special needs student that went to the same school as my kids. I sat in silence for a long time. I could not believe such evil had come to our little town. Then I remembered the old woman. I remembered the terror in her eyes when she talked about the black souls surrounding the laundromat. The shakiness in her voice when she said they brought death. Had she been right? Could she really see something the rest of us could not? Was she more in tune with the world beyond this one? Because she was getting close to joining it. My blood ran cold. And then I thought about her jagged finger. That finger, pale and veiny, pointing at me, warning me that next time the black souls, those bringers of death, were coming for me. And I think about that old woman and her warning every night when I lay down to sleep. When I wake, will those black-souled bringers of death be waiting for me? Assuming they'd let me wake up at all.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.